Chapter 8:18. It really wasn't easy. The virtual brain system still remembered this young master's original goal. Luo Nan was a bit stupefied by the series of evaluations and results. He only came back to his senses when he saw the last sentence. He subconsciously let out a sigh of relief. But when he thought about it in detail, he felt a bit unbalanced in his heart. Of the 4 main authorizations, the Heavenly Abyss Network had been disconnected and could be ignored. The remaining 3, knowledge search and resource transfer, had changed from pending detection to detected. Among them, knowledge search had also been upgraded to Celestial Stairway Level 4. He did a set of Heaven Stairway Level 2 tests and obtained the right to check out Heaven Stairway Level 4. It looked pretty good. Bullshit. The core of the test, ownership, didn't change at all from the word to the meaning. He had been tossing and turning for so long, but in the end, he was still a temporary owner. Someone could point at his nose and tell him to return the item to its rightful owner at any time. What was the use of this sort of confirmation and review process? Luo Nan cut a sorry figure during the offline test and finally obtained this kind of result. Luo Nan was quite vexed. However, Luo Nan was a good and reasonable child in nature. He knew how to look for reasons from himself for everything. After calming down for a bit, he thought back to the entire test process. It really wasn't all that amazing. The final evaluation he obtained was quite conservative. Reality was reality. No matter what objective factors existed, the test evaluation had its own preset standards. Luo Nan was unable to reason with the system. Oh, my head hurts. Luo Nan's mental and physical state began to slide into a low ebb. His results from the low-altitude sweep were just one of the factors. A considerable portion originated from the life-saving mapping during the test. This could be considered a kind of backlash. The amount of information from the sediment was quite large in an instant. Fortunately, it had been washed by the altar's spiderweb, so it was easier to digest than the direct impact of the abyss world. Luo Nan was a bit regretful. The mapping that was activated during the test formed mostly instant memories. Now that he thought about it, there wasn't much that he could remember. It was a bit like forcefully memorizing a question to pass the test. He had to memorize it in one gulp. He had to come to the question, the situation, and the conditions before he could think of the answer. After the test, everything returned to square one. The sediment continued to precipitate. Perhaps it was waiting for the next stimulus to arrive. After Luo Nan discovered this, he was unable to inspect his spoils of war. He hurriedly retracted the external neuron and opened up the virtual workspace on the yacht. He took stock of the little bit of memory information that remained. This person, his former enemy, was now his submissive servant. She was clearly a vicious character with a heart like a snake or scorpion, but she was forced to act like this in front of him. Even though she still had pride and schemes deep within her heart, she was like ice shards during the dog days of summer. She couldn't show her face. She couldn't see the light. Luo Nan could easily knead and knead her as he pleased. He could mobilize her joy and fear. He could dictate her life and death. He could browse through every hidden detail. He could even casually smear on them to see a new round of reactions and transformations. Snake Tongue could only passively adapt until she became accustomed to it. Or she could make changes that Luo Nan permitted. She had already done quite well. After the conversation in the bathroom, her corrections were very clear. She knew better than to look at the problems on the psychological level. She certainly still had some unwillingness in the depths of her heart. Her unruliness was still there. Her lofty and unyielding character still existed. The more it was like this, the more painful it was, but she was able to obtain an unending stream of strength from it. She still lacked a bit of conscious self-awareness up until now, as well as a method to efficiently utilize it. So much so that she had suffered a lot of torment for no reason. Luo Nan was unable to help her with this. Frankly speaking, he was quite pleased to see Snake Tongue struggle. Cough. Luo Nan was a bit unaccustomed to suddenly digging out the dark side of his heart. But in this sort of one-sided situation, there was a marvelous calmness that came from letting oneself fly. In any case, his mood had indeed turned for the better. He removed the veil of invisibility from his face and handed it back to Snake Tongue. He even made a joke in passing, "Your acting skills were all trained on North Manshuahue, right?" Luo Nan laughed out loud during Snake Tongue's momentary stillness. He pulled out the information related to the lamination interference technology from the virtual brain system. The information wasn't a huge tome, but its form was quite interesting. It was similar to the amalgamation of an experimental diary and a thesis draft. It was a bit messy for other people, but Luo Nan had a solid foundation in configuration. He also had the mindset of a researcher. The entire research train of thought was simply moved before his eyes. Even though there were a few uncommon characters inside that he was unable to recognize and translate, it didn't affect the overall situation. Compared to the experience of the offline test, it was simply the difference between heaven and earth. Luo Nan skimmed through the information and had a preliminary understanding of the context of the entire information. He also quickly grasped the crux of a problem. He raised his eyes and saw that Snake Tongue was just about to leave the room. He shouted, "Wait!" Snake Tongue was already North Manshuahue. She raised her head in a slight daze. Her face was even colder and purer than her original appearance. It intersected with her sinister and malicious image from before, forming a rather large visual impact. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment before he said, "Stay here. Help me with some experiments." "Yeah." According to the information, the veil of concealment and the veil of silence weren't the carriers of the spirit core for lamination interference technology. Instead, they were just extensions. They weren't made of natural materials, nor did they go through any special processing techniques. They were just true lamination interference spirit cores. They were in a semi-energized state, absorbing the energy of the outside world over the years to carry out the transformation of mass and energy. They were paired with a small portion of special raw materials to weave themselves into strange objects. According to the information, Mr. Liang Lu's original intention in creating the spirit core was to conceal his identity. Therefore, the combat power of the entire set of objects wasn't that great. This was especially true for the transformation and interference axis of the spirit core itself. It was precise and relatively fragile. It would often disintegrate in battle, and it couldn't be mass-produced. It could only be made according to the specific state of the lamination layer and the user situation. It was a test of thought and skill. Liang Lu's self-evaluation also said that the relevant design ideas and techniques were actually a level higher than the evaluation of the work. However, the repeatability of the spirit core was far too poor, so it could only reach the fourth level of the celestial stairway. It was a step away from the title of nobility. It was quite regretful that he couldn't leave his name in the annals of history. Luo Nan didn't quite understand the background of this technology, but he did understand one thing: the product of lamination interference spirit core was a top-notch concealment equipment. If it was operated properly, the user could even change their characteristics in the mental domain, becoming a completely different person. This kind of ability was seriously overflowing. Wouldn't it be too wasteful to use it purely for concealment? The information also said that as a derivative of the spirit core, the dual muslin and the frame of the body and soul must be highly integrated. Otherwise, the interweaving and changing power would injure the user first. This set a very high requirement for the changes, matching, and blending of the user's body and soul structure. The most interesting thing was that the information wasn't limited to the simple pairing of one person and one object. Instead, it was placed on a broader societal level. It researched how to make the characteristics formed by lamination interference approach what kind of person, what kind of standpoint, what kind of person, and what kind of person's faith. This was done in order to obtain the approval of the corresponding circles, to eliminate their vigilance and killing intent. It was simply a teaching syllabus for the study of disguise. Luo Nan had yet to formally begin, but he already felt that he had learned a lot. At the very least, he knew that the extraterrestrial civilization that Mr. Liang Lu resided in was a complex and turbulent society that could be labeled as a heretic at any time. Luo Nan also noticed that the information clearly involved the mutual interference of the body and soul, but there wasn't a single word or sentence that involved the words soul strength, mental plane, and the like. The corresponding concepts were all replaced with things like material waves, thought waves, and so on. Translated, this was the meaning. The smell was a bit familiar, Dean Wan. Wasn't this the concept that Dean Wan's order of creation had always emphasized? Chapter 8:19. Hua Dian was the unluckiest person in the world. At least in the 10 days after the 28th of April, Hua Dian firmly believed so. Under the bastard horn demon's terrible ability to control the situation, a routine business investigation suddenly turned into a swing on the line between life and death. The messy arrangements, the baffling traps, the sudden infighting, there were also two almighty extraordinaries who had come from thousands of miles away to attach their souls to him. By the time Hua Dian snapped to his senses, he had already been held hostage in the wilderness laboratory and stayed there for 10 days. 10 days was a very long period of time, especially when there was a lack of water and food. Even a superpower would be done for. Hua Dian was glad that every time he went out on a mission, he would prepare emergency energy bars and water replenishment capsules. Over the past few days, he had been frugal and meticulous with his plans. He had finally managed to survive. As for the others, he had to say that apart from him, there was no normal person in the laboratory. Ignoring the two who were possessed by extraordinary souls, Jingxin and Horn Demon were two dogs in front of a true god. They could live by the whims of others and couldn't be judged by common sense. As for the remaining two, Hua Dian originally wanted to find a sense of superiority. At the very least, he wanted to experience the feeling of being in the same boat. However, the reality dealt him a heavy blow. Saint Anthony probably didn't prepare enough supplies and ran out of food a week ago. However, he had relied on the pure and rich holy light in his body to mutate and adjust his organs. He entered a state of ascetic cultivation and endured it day by day. Although he was nearly 2 times thinner than before he came in, he was still in high spirits without any signs of fatigue. His mind was even clearer. The one with the surname Wan walked around the laboratory every day, constantly gesturing with his composition. If he was tired, he could squeeze out water from the air to replenish his energy. The more Hua Dian saw, the more she suspected that this guy's mouth could automatically produce liquid food and the like, so that he would never have to worry about food shortages. Against these two, be it in terms of willpower or ability, Hua Dian had no choice but to admit defeat. Worst of all, they were silent fellows. They wouldn't say anything for 2 to 3 days, so there was no way for them to communicate. It bored Hua Dian to death. Perhaps he was only suitable to be a commercial spy. However, it was precisely in such an environment that Hua Dian's sense of crisis was increasing day by day under the encirclement of these people. The big fish ate the small fish, and the small fish ate the shrimps. This was the ecology of the inner world. He wasn't willing to be someone's dog, and his abilities were a notch lower than others. Once he caused trouble, the outcome that awaited him would most likely not be too good. I have to leave. I have to leave quickly. From the first day he entered the laboratory, Hua Dian had never given up on this idea. He had even thought of more than a dozen plans, but none of them were feasible. The regular way in and out of the laboratory was in the hands of Luo Yuan. He had been very easygoing from beginning to end, as if he were there to watch the fun. The question of whether or not to leave the laboratory was completely controlled by the true God. As for the true God, this Almighty who could summon the wind and summon the rain outside, he was willing to stay in this small laboratory because he wanted to dig out the mystery within. At least before the East Ocean auction was held on May 16th, he didn't want to waste a single second. Leave. How could this be? Moreover, Luo Yuan had been saying with a smile that the void environment of the laboratory was unstable. Everyone could be left behind at any time, and it would not be so easy to come in again. Every time he said this, Hua Dian wanted to punch him. He must have done it on purpose, to deliberately provoke him. With the mentality of the true God, the more he heard such words, the less likely it was to leave easily. However, the fact was that they had been here for 10 days, and the entire laboratory was like a small bunker with 1,000 piles. It couldn't be more stable. Even if the sudden storm passed through 2 days ago, causing a certain amount of impact damage to the two cluster-shaped corridors of the laboratory, the main body of the laboratory was as stable as Mount Tai. Not stable at all. But it was also after that storm that the intensity of the true God's experiment suddenly increased to a level. As the key area of the experiment, the observation hall, Hua Dian no longer dared to approach. The safest thing to do now was to find a room that had not been eroded by the sandstorm and hide in it. But Hua Dian was the kind of person who couldn't stay idle. Just now, he followed Wan Ta and strolled in the right cluster-shaped corridor for a while. In comparison, this man, who was said to be a welfare dean in the secular world, was relatively easy to talk to. In particular, some of the outlines he drew often involved the structure of the laboratory, and perhaps the analysis of the sandstorm outside. Hua Dian quietly recorded it, ready to go out, as his own harvest, to extort more money from the employer. Wan Ta should be able to detect his behavior of secretly photographing, but he did not stop it, so Hua Dian took it as his acquiescence. After some photographing and collecting, Wan Ta closed his eyes and rested there, adjusting his thoughts. Hua Dian went up to chat with him for a while, but he didn't get the point, so he retreated and walked back along the corridor. Just as he was thinking about where to go, his scalp suddenly went numb. The sound of heavy footsteps came from the front. Because of the curvature, he couldn't see the appearance of the person coming, but his mind had automatically imagined the seemingly sluggish body of the fat dragon. The true God. For 10 days, the true God had been sending his soul to this loyal believer, leading everything in the laboratory. It could be said that he controlled everyone's life and death apart from Luo Yuan. Hua Dian instinctively didn't wish to meet this person. He turned his gaze and saw that the door to a room in front of him was ajar. It hadn't been eroded by the sandstorm. Without thinking too much, he plunged into the room. When he entered, he suddenly thought of a problem. According to the latest popular cage theory, by the time he discovered the true God, he would probably have been in and out several times. Why bother? Hua Dian froze at the door as Fat Dragon's body slowly walked past him. He didn't even turn his head, ignoring Hua Dian's existence. Instead, it was Jingxin, who was following behind, who shot a glance over and bared his teeth in amusement, looking very amiable. Damn, simp. Hua Dian didn't have a good impression of Jingxin. This wilderness ecology expert who held a post in the Ability User Association had really embarrassed all the technicians in the world. However, he was still somewhat curious. After the two of them walked over, he even poked his head out to take a look. However, due to the curvature of the corridor, he couldn't see the end. He didn't dare go forward either. After poking his head out a few times, he gave up. It was also at this moment that Hua Dian suddenly felt that something was amiss. He turned his head and saw that in the corner of the empty room, there was someone sitting on the ground with his back against the wall. He didn't seem to have any energy at all. He was like a lump of meat that had been kneaded and thrown there. The lump of meat could still move. Its only arms slid around the ground and walls as it searched. Sometimes, it would use its nails to forcefully dig out some powder and place it in front of its eyes. Finally, it would lick it with its tongue or even swallow it. Ugh! Only a horned demon could do such a disgusting thing. Although Horned Demon and Jingxin were the two dogs under the true god's feet, there was actually a difference between dogs. Jingxin was a very competent bootlicker. His only job every day was to serve the true god well. As for the centaur, the initiator of the current situation, after losing an arm, his temperament became more and more weird and gloomy. He did some weird behavior that others couldn't understand. It was appropriate to call him a mad dog. Regardless of what he thought, he had to maintain his dignity. Hua Dian tried his best to ignore horned demons and human actions. The corner of his mouth twitched as he revealed a smile. Sorry, I didn't know there was someone here. Sorry to disturb you. Something's wrong. Chapter 820. Hua Dian hated that the corridor was too short. Before he could sort out the situation in his shocked brain, Fatty Dragon's back was already in front of him. The only thing that comforted him was that he had just remembered that Wanta was also here. He had been pondering over the composition at the end of the corridor all this time. If a true god came, the two sides would definitely bump into each other. Hua Dian then realized that there were already 5 people gathered at the end of the corridor. Aside from Luo Yuan and Anthony, everyone else in the laboratory was here. The true god was in charge of everything, and the focus was. Hua Dian's eyelids twitched. The further he got from the end of the corridor, the worse he felt. A slight flow of air that shouldn't have appeared brushed past his cheeks, evoking a certain memory in the depths of his heart. He subconsciously turned his left wrist, but he still felt that it wasn't enough. He used his other hand to touch it, but all he felt was skin, flesh, and bone. 10 days ago, when he first arrived at the laboratory, there was a wristwatch on it. It was just that the guide, Luo Yuan, took it off and threw it into. Hua Dian stopped. The true god and Wanta were conversing in front of him. The effect is okay, right? It didn't completely block the infiltration. The storm 2 days ago caused some changes in the environment. It's fine as long as it's more or less useful. We can adjust and correct it later. The effect isn't obvious. Let's verify it first, then come to a conclusion. I see that you've been researching for the past few days. You came from Xia City. You and Luo Nan often communicate on composition design. Very little. Our communication is more on the use of the brain and the construction of thought and logic. Your relationship isn't bad, huh? It is. From Hua Dian's point of view, the conversation between the two seemed to be spontaneous and flowed naturally, but there was tension and coldness seeping through it. If Hua Dian was purely a bystander, he would be happy to analyze it in detail. But right now, Jingxin was staring at him with a fake smile, forcing him to move forward. Hua Dian's heart was filled with ominous clouds. Up ahead, at the end of the corridor, there was an even more eye-catching scene aside from the two conversing. The metal door that led to the so-called tree hole was open. Hua Dian felt his scalp tingle as he subconsciously retreated. Jingxin coughed beside him, wanting to warn him. At this time, Fat Dragon had already turned around. His face was stiff, but his eyes shone with the brilliance of a true god. When the bright light shone on him, Hua Dian's body froze on the spot, motionless. Something's not right. The centaur on the other side was confused again. As he muttered, he picked some powder from the wall of the corridor next to him. His aura, which had been repressed by the true god, came to life as he began exerting strength from his feet. But at that moment, he clearly saw Fat Dragon's muscular body distort at the end of the corridor. In fact, what was being distorted was the air and perception. Then, the distorting force was used on Hua Dian and Wanta. A muffled explosion sounded in the corridor as Wanta's body slammed into the wall. The back of Hua Dian's head hit the ground. Even Jingxin was pushed 3 to 5 meters away as he slammed into the curved corner of the corridor. On the other hand, the horned demon didn't care about what happened here. He headed straight for the true God and happened to avoid the frontal assault. At that moment, he stopped and turned his head curiously. No matter what, Hua Dian was still a B rank. His previous reaction wasn't up to standard, mainly because he was being suppressed by the true God. Now that he had hit his head on the ground, he was completely clear-headed. It was time to risk his life. The few plans that he had been pondering over the past few days flashed through his mind, but in the end, he reacted instinctively. He exerted strength in his legs and shoulders at the same time, his body sticking close to the ground as he slid backward at high speeds. Soft sounds of sonic booms rang out as 7 bone talismans shot into the air. These bone talismans were said to be props made by a certain transcendent. After Hua Dian bought them at a high price, he had been keeping them close to his body. Every time he used one, he would feel the heartache for days. But now, he was throwing them out as though they were free. High frequency, high pressure, and highly chaotic impacts exploded one after another. The external physical impact was secondary. A considerable portion of it was used on the mental level. It connected to the illusory abyss to summon a storm with greater destructive power. Whoosh! It was as though a gale had passed through the corridor, emitting a muffled howl that caused one's blood to sink. Some of these bone talismans killed indiscriminately. Hua Dian was also affected, so he couldn't figure out the changes in the outside world. He didn't hope to injure the true God. All he wanted was to cause the laboratory space to tremble. Also, according to his observations over the past few days, there was an area similar to the one that swallowed his wristwatch, past the corner, the second door. I'll take a gamble. Hua Dian had already slid past Jingxin. The latter was struck by the abyss storm summoned by the bone talisman. His reaction was a beat too slow, preventing him from intercepting him. Hua Dian's shoulder brushed against the corner wall, but he didn't slow down at all. The locked door was right in front of him. His heart stirred, and just as he was about to jump up, his chest suddenly felt stuffy and hot. Then, there was a muffled sound of his sternum collapsing. As though he had been trampled by an invisible elephant, Hua Dian's sliding body was suddenly nailed to the spot. Apart from his twitching hands and feet, there was no other movement. Stupidity can be contagious, but life can't be shared. The tremors caused by the bone talisman were rapidly dispersed. After a moment of chaos, the true gods will suppress the entire space like a resplendent sun. The power and order that belonged to him forcefully interfered with the surrounding area, gathering into an invisible cage that trapped the heavily injured Hua Dian. It also trapped Wan Ta and continued compressing the space. Wan Ta didn't wait for death. He arched his body slightly and gathered his arms in front of his chest, assuming a defensive posture. His mouth opened and closed slightly, but no sound could be heard. However, invisible waves were emitted, causing the surrounding space to tremble incessantly. It resisted the cage cast by the true God. Affected by this, the corridor clearly buzzed and trembled. At that moment, Jingxin snapped back to his senses from the impact of the bone talisman. Compared to the instant chaos created by Hua Dian, he was even more surprised that Wan Ta could enter a stalemate with the power cast by the true God. Even if they were separated by thousands of kilometers, the true God's power would definitely be greatly weakened. Furthermore, he hadn't activated the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure or used any divine powers. However, in this face-to-face struggle, the true God's perfect and harmonious power structure naturally had a level suppression. Hua Dian's outcome was proof. How did Wan Ta manage to persevere to this point? The true God was most likely surprised as well. He urged Fat Dragon to speak, giving treatment that far exceeded Hua Dian's. I understand the so-called bad temper of the technicians. I don't mind giving you a chance to explain. Wan Ta's lips opened slightly wider. It's easier for me to explain to the children this way. It's beneficial for moral education. The true god didn't speak again. However, the fat dragon he possessed had ferocious patterns on its plain and fleshy face. Together with the brilliant divine light in its eyes, they formed a perfect representation of his emotions. At that moment, footsteps approached. The commotion in the right corridor couldn't be hidden from others. Anthony and Luo Yuan, who were in other parts of the laboratory, arrived one after another. Anthony arrived first. He walked to Hua Dian's side and didn't say a word when he saw this. He squatted down and pressed his palm on Hua Dian's chest. A mercury-like glow descended, stimulating the activity of his organs and temporarily alleviating the heavy injuries in his chest and abdomen. Luo Yuan was the last to arrive. He walked slowly and even limped a little. He had been like this for 2 or 3 days. Chapter 8:21. The scene in front of him went from light to darkness, then from darkness to light, from the distorted laboratory environment to the illogical sandstorm fragments, then to the familiar sky and land. Finally, there were turbid water waves and bitter liquid that poured into his mouth and nose. Hua Dian floated in the water. His chest and abdomen seemed to have been splashed with sulfuric acid. He was in so much pain that his hands and feet twitched. He couldn't stop coughing, bringing out the blood in his lungs and salty water in his esophagus and trachea. The current pain, as well as the possible fatal infection and injury that followed, consumed most of his energy. His mind was also in a mess, but as long as the last scene in the laboratory continued to flash in his mind, Hua Dian's future days could be lived with a smile. Awesome, it's awesome. To think that a true god would have such a day. At that moment, the true god and fat dragon, whose soul was attached to them, were kicked into the tree hole's ruins by the crazy horn demon. As it turned out, Jingxin's words couldn't be trusted at all. What adequate preparation? It was just a pile of dog shit. At that moment, the true god personally swallowed it. Ayaya, to think that fat dragon was in between. What a pity. Of course, it was impossible for the true god to swallow his sh*t. The moment he fell into the tree hole or even the sandstorm, a mental storm erupted and swept through the entire laboratory. The scene of Luo Yuan's prophecy came as scheduled. The void structure of the laboratory was distorted and leaking everywhere. A large number of cracks expelled everyone present into the unfathomable void crevice. Hua Dian still remembered that Luo Yuan had mentioned a few unlucky people who shared the same fate as him. From the current situation, he was considered one of the luckier ones among his kind. After being ejected from the laboratory, he followed an incomprehensible tunnel and passed through the void barrier, returning to the familiar Earth spacetime. Furthermore, he fell into a plateau saltwater lake, reducing the impact. There was no need to consider radiation pollution for the time being. Bam! There was a dull sound of water beside him. Someone was a step behind Hua Dian and crashed into the saltwater lake. They quickly discovered him and reached out to pull him up by the shoulder. Hua Dian was shocked at first, but when he rolled his eyes and barely recognized the person's silhouette, he relaxed and complained vaguely, "You almost killed me just now." The other party didn't respond. Hua Dian was carried ashore and lay in the mud on the shore. Then, the other party ignored him. Do you have to be so ruthless? Hua Dian's throat was foaming with dirty water and blood, and her vision was blurred. She only saw the man standing by the shore of the lake, reaching out his hand to confirm the position of the setting sun. Then, he gestured in the air with an incomprehensible pattern, continuing his usual practice in the laboratory, as if he was calculating something. Hey, Wan Ta, Dean Wan, someone is really going to die here. Several seconds later, Vanta, who had finished some calculations, finally responded, Anthony's emergency response is very good. When I pulled you up, I also performed bone setting and partial coagulation for you with the help of the buoyancy of the water. You won't die. It's true. Hua Dian also noticed that when he was first injured, it was difficult for him to even speak. He felt as if his heart and lungs had been destroyed by the inverted sternum. But now, other than being infected, everything seemed to be fine. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and said, "Thank you." This time, it was a sincere reply. Not for anything else, but for Wanta's previous stance. It would be better if they could be more harmonious in the form. Wanta's attitude did not change because of a "thank you." He looked calm and squatted down to check the restoration of Hua Dian's sternum. "It's okay for now, but it's still very dangerous if we have to travel long distances. Do you have anyone to help? If my team is patient enough, contact them. It's best if they can arrive quickly. If I'm not wrong, we were randomly projected within a radius of more than 70 kilometers, which is not far from each other. The true god is a bit embarrassed at the moment, but mainly because Fat Dragon is trapped in the sandstorm, and he doesn't want to lose such a high-quality believer. Once we slow down, we probably won't be able to escape. F***CK. Hua Dian immediately operated the communicator and established contact with his team. Fortunately, he had a good character. The communication was quickly connected, and both sides confirmed each other's position. It will take at least 40 minutes for them to send the shuttle over. It will take longer if they fly covertly. Wanta replied with an "oh" and did not show much emotion. He did not care about the muddy environment of the lake and sat next to Hua Dian. "Lend me your communicator." "My communicator is broken." Hua Dian quickly handed over the communicator and unlocked the permission. "Just use it." "Do you have anyone to help you? Can it be faster?" "No, it's not that. At present, we can only rely on probability." "Then, I just want to send some information to the person who should know the most." Hua Dian did not understand at first. When he came back to his senses, Wanta had already sent the message and threw the communicator back. "Hey, you are not sending it to Professor Luo, are you?" Wanta did not answer, but Hua Dian already knew the answer. He felt pain in his chest again. If this message is sent, the auction on the high seas will collapse in the blink of an eye. "Do you know that?" Wanta did not respond. Hua Dian was about to say something, but suddenly remembered that even the true god could not find the hidden location of the laboratory. Only former members like Luo Yuan could distinguish it. What's the use of sending the approximate location? Or could it be that Wanta could accurately locate it? If so, how did he determine the location of the laboratory? Hua Dian's mind was in a mess. It was meaningless to stop him, but his thoughts were not clear enough to get to the bottom of it. In the end, he could only sigh. "Screw you. This is not a good place anyway. I can stop my employer from investing blindly and prevent him from getting involved in the resources that the Amaterasu cult is determined to get. He should give me a bonus for that alone. Use my communicator. If Professor Luo Jr. comes back, I can also establish contact with him. What I saw in the laboratory over the past 10 days might be able to be sold for a good price." Wanta finally said, "For every word you speak less, your recovery time will be shortened by an hour." Heh, I was also a man of few words in the past. It must have been infected by that simp, Jingxin. Hua Dian obviously knew her body's condition, but her tense heartstrings and the pressure that continued to rise could only be alleviated through nagging. After all, he was facing an extraordinary. And not just one. This transaction could be said to be a huge loss. It was a huge blow to his business contacts. In the future, all his business in Ban City would probably be abandoned. Hua Dian was annoyed. He shut his mouth and eyes and worked hard to regulate his breathing and heart function. However, there was still a question lingering in his mind that was difficult to solve. Who was it? After surviving a disaster, Hua Dian's mind became more and more clear. He could be sure of one thing: no matter how bad the situation was, the centaur would not kick the true god's ass. The fact that it was out of the norm most likely had a reasonable hidden link to play a role in private. Thinking of the centaur's recent bad state, and the way the two extraordinary Luo Yuan and the true god came, Hua Dian made a logical inference, which made his heart twitch again. Hey, Dean Wan, could it be that in addition to the true god and Luo Yuan, there is another, involved? It was almost the same method, but it was more subtle and traceless. Was he thinking too much? Wan Ta did not discuss this topic with him. He lowered his head to help Hua Dian knead and deal with the organ tissue in his chest and abdomen. It was a pure physical technique, but it was very sophisticated. Hua Dian's groaning was very useful. Gradually, his mind was a little scattered, and he no longer used his brain. After a few minutes, Wan Ta suddenly stopped. To be more precise, he moved his hand to Hua Dian's mouth and nose and gently covered it. Hua Dian, who originally closed his eyes to enjoy, suddenly opened his eyes. He was also alert. Chapter 8:22. Ahahaha, this kick is really cool. I've been unhappy with him for a long time. Who are you? Who are you? I've caught you. I've caught you. Under the red sun, the centaur staggered across the wasteland. He suddenly shouted and suddenly laughed. His mouth was still spitting out some illogical words. The current centaur was a madman. But at the same time, he was also a genius. Luo Nan quietly observed and determined the nature of the centaur from thousands of kilometers away. The centaur was indeed a genius. His senses on the mental plane were extremely sharp, and he possessed his own logic. He was able to discover subtleties that were difficult for ordinary people to understand from unexpected angles. He tasted the soil, mud, and powder. He started from the perception of the material and connected to a broader level of information. Luo Nan was still unable to understand the inconceivable aspects. It was no wonder that he was personally recommended by Old Yu despite his eccentric personality. He was one of the people with the greatest potential on the mental side of the Xia City branch. However, success came from geniuses. Failure came from geniuses. The current situation of the centaur was due to the backlash of his talent. Because of his keen perception, he was able to feel the infiltration of Luo Nan's consciousness. He captured the traces of Luo Nan's existence and instinctively sensed the danger. Especially at the moment when he kicked down the true god in the laboratory. This unconventional operation had already exceeded the scope of psychological suggestion. It was completed by Luo Nan's forceful control, thus exposing even more traces. While the space of the laboratory was turbulent, the centaur relied on his talent and his unique sense of smell to trace back and form some sort of spying. The originally one-way conductive line became two-way. This was a fatal link. Compared to Luo Nan's level, the centaur was still far behind. Luo Nan's soul cloak, the multi-layered void interweaved in the sandwich domain, and the altar spider web that had just precipitated a huge amount of information from the abyss world. For the centaur, this entire mental plane structure was equivalent to a small abyss world. It was far beyond the scope of his understanding. Unfortunately, he still forcefully wanted to spy and analyze it. It was tantamount to opening the last throttle. A huge flow of information came crashing down. Luo Nan had already penetrated his mental defenses into 1,000 holes. He could not withstand the impact of the backlash no matter what. Moreover, centaurs didn't have an altar spider web, so there was no possibility of buffer precipitation. Under the impact of the terrifying information flow, the horn demon's mind domain, which had its own logic and rules, shattered like an eggshell. He's done for. Luo Nan was certain that the self-logic system of the horn demon had short-circuited and completely crashed. He was speaking to the horn demon, but the sharpness of the telepathic thoughts was clearly piercing deeper into the mental domain. What to do? Then. A thought suddenly popped up in Luo Nan's mind. Using soul magnetization is just right. Huh, what the hell was that again? Luo Nan was absent-minded for a moment. Finally, his memories from some time ago were particularly deep. He quickly locked onto the corresponding region. The so-called soul magnetization was a certain scene from the external neurons offline test. The strange thing was that this method did not come from the relay station that Luo Nan had been researching and pondering about all this time. Instead, it came from his opposite, the vassal of the fantasy breed. Luo Nan had some impressions of it, but it was absolutely not as clear and deep as it was now. The information deposited in the abyss world has been activated. This was the only reason Luo Nan received. He was unable to analyze it in depth. The true God's power had already broken through the world and entered. Luo Nan brought out the power of the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure without holding anything back. The power firmly locked onto the horn demon, piercing through the horn demon's fleshly shell. Luo Nan attempted to invade the mental plane and trace back to its roots. Luo Nan needed to organize a solid defense. Then let's do it. The altar's spiderweb seemed to tremble and ripple slightly. Rich and detailed information poured into Luo Nan's mind with this slight movement. The details of the scene from the offline test were so clear and precise that Luo Nan did not need to analyze it. He just needed to draw a ladle from the gourd. Luo Nan was able to realize an extremely similar effect. It was at this very moment that dark clouds and thunder appeared out of thin air outside of the true God's giant shadow palm and the sunlight blade under the high plateau's sky. The scale was far inferior to the scene from the offline test, but the necessary methods were not lacking in the slightest. Lightning curled around the horned demon's body, and mist spread out. The dual power that came from the material plane and the mental plane forcefully brushed down, distorting and even completely changing the structure of the horned demon's body and soul. Luo Nan's consciousness seemed to be assimilated with the mountain range of clouds in the test scene amidst his days. They were indistinguishable from each other. Luo Nan clearly analyzed the marvels of its internal operation, slightly changing the scene, and efficiently using it on this side of the world. The horned demon howled in pain and struggled instinctively. The old and new wounds on its body burst open. It was a tragic sight to behold. But this bit of resistance no longer possessed any practical meaning under the effects of this power that exceeded the scope of his understanding. Mist filled the air, thunder rumbled, and lightning flashed. The horned demon's figure dissipated within the lightning, and then it was reborn. It was also at this moment that Luo Nan truly realized complete control over the horned demon. There was no longer any obstruction between the two. On the wasteland, the horned demon suddenly raised his head to face the piercing sunlight blade. On the mental plane, it pierced through the layers of the void, forming a connection and collision with the gaze of the true God. A continuous stream of lightning and fire burned through the void barrier in an instant. But then it shuttled back and forth, performing the most exquisite of repairs and stitches amidst the chaotic and pervasive cloud of fragmented smoke. The void was destroyed and reborn with it. A new structure was erected behind the front line of the void. It advanced, merged, and corrected. Layer upon layer, it gradually solidified the void gap. This method was a reference to the offline test scene. It was the transit station's defense project of the space-time barrier. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was a matter of course. The situation stabilized a bit, but it was destined to be a bitter battle. Of course, this was not Luo Nan's first time fighting against an extraordinary, but he had never experienced losing and then forcefully turning the tables. He was a bit excited. He made preparations for a long stalemate and confrontation. But at this moment, the true God's reaction exceeded his expectations. A short and undulating syllable penetrated over. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Forgive Luo Nan. He didn't understand what this meant at all. This shouldn't be any language from Earth. Otherwise, the built-in language system of Luo Nan's AI would certainly have done a good job of marking and translating. But on the other hand, the division of syllables and rhythm of the sentence had a strong sense of familiarity, rising and falling in a chaotic sense of contradiction. After bobbing up and down several times, the secret me character symbol suppressed within the core of Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly shone with great radiance. It illuminated his mind, and it combed through the string of syllables once more, forming the meaning of reality. Soul magnetization. The meaning was synchronized, but the special way of expressing it made Luo Nan's heart tremble with fear. The true God on the other side felt that it should be about the same. The true God's oppressive powers suddenly shrunk back amidst this atmosphere. It broke away from Luo Nan and quickly vanished into the void, leaving not a trace behind. The wasteland returned to its previous appearance. Only the centaur, an outsider, nailed his body to the wasteland. The setting sun shone on his back, forming a long shadow. There was always an end to the shadow, but the horrified emotions in Luo Nan's mind continued to extend outwards. He wanted to grasp some of the mysteries, but he was still lacking by a thread. At this moment, the external neuron vibrated. Chapter 8:23. No matter the time, the external neuron's movements were always at the forefront of Luo Nan's mind. Now it was even more sensitive. Even though the reaction of a true god and the state of the horned demon were worth pondering, Luo Nan still temporarily withdrew his thoughts from the wilderness. He focused on the virtual brain interface and quickly scanned it twice. There was clearly a prompt response, but there was no definite information. Luo Nan rarely saw this sort of situation. He did not dare to be negligent. He examined the virtual brain interface with all his concentration. He hated that he could not search the central region where the myriad stars converged. Fortunately, he had not reached this stage yet. He was able to capture the source of the change. It was one of the two large satellites in the periphery of the central virtual brain galaxy. It was the outer space flying ship that had always been in a state of isolation. Since there was nothing to dig up, Luo Nan had subconsciously overlooked it in the past. But ever since he officially came into contact with the abyss world, aside from the extreme structure of balance between order and chaos and the corresponding backlash power, the thing that gave Luo Nan the deepest impression was the solitary floating in the periphery of the abyss. It seemed as if the flying ship could collapse at any time. One was inside and one was outside. One was far and one was near. But the impression it gave others was carved from the same mold. Luo Nan could not help but suspect that there was a close relationship between the two. Right now, the outer space flying ship was still in a state of isolation. It was far from comparable to the exoskeleton armor on the other side. But when Luo Nan focused his thoughts and observed carefully, the flying ship, which had always been in an unreadable state, lit up a certain region in the middle of the ship's hull. The specks of light there were distributed in chunks. There was a dizzying effect, but it was more transparent. The light from the inside of the flying ship seeped out. It was as if the facilities and equipment in that region had been connected to an energy source. The program had been activated, and it began to hum and operate. Luo Nan's thoughts probed over, and they really did enter. The unreadable state of the outer space flying ship became history. It opened up certain privileges to Luo Nan. When Luo Nan's thoughts cut in, they were limited to the electrified region. There were no more obstructions. He could feel a large amount of precise and complex structures. It was as if it truly existed. It was a high-end ship that could travel in space. It was just that it was in a mini form. And it was precisely because it was mini that the degree of precision of certain regions had exceeded the precision limits of Luo Nan's mental perception under the situation of being shrunk proportionally. It was as if a layer of dense fog was wrapped around it, making it hard to see too clearly. In this indescribably tiny space, in this state of precision and fuzziness, there was a piece of equipment. It was being displayed on the bright screen. There was a display interface on the device, on which an extremely tiny trajectory module was flashing. It looked familiar. Luo Nan pushed his microscopic perception to the limit, and he finally recognized it. Wasn't this the offline test he had just passed not long ago? Wasn't this the scalp-numbing and complicated management cockpit interface? Luo Nan would be able to recognize it even if it had shrunk by 100 or 1,000 times. The interface flashed silently. It was still in a relatively simple initial stage, and it seemed to be inviting him to enter again. Luo Nan really did cast his telepathy over, but the result he obtained was system loading external data, offline testing function maintenance. External information. Was it referring to external information like soul magnetization? Was it an established process, or was there some kind of stimulation? It was most likely the latter. Luo Nan recalled the contents of the flash of inspiration when he fought with a true god. Of course, there was also the earlier process of offline testing, the information input process that helped him solve his problems. They all came from the precipitated information of the alter spiderweb, but in the end, they still came from the abyss world. The external neuron didn't refuse anything. Or perhaps this was its method of analyzing information from the abyss world. Luo Nan could basically determine the close relationship between the external neuron and the airship at the edge of the abyss, from the external neuron's internal and external reflections, from the sending and receiving modes of the signal waves. But he still needed to observe the relationship between Team 1 and the abyss world. At the very least, he needed to see what kind of changes would occur after the so-called functional maintenance. Returning to a more realistic level, Luo Nan thought about the subtle evaluation he had obtained and the high probability of his low flying score. Frankly speaking, he was a bit unconvinced. If he could do it all over again, that would be pretty good. Basically, Luo Nan viewed this change as a positive trend. All that was left was to wait. He let out a breath, and his thoughts returned to the wasteland. The horned demon, who had just been cleansed by the soul magnetization, stood there quietly. It was no longer insane, but it was like a wooden stake. It was as if it had become an empty shell. Had it been formatted? Luo Nan imitated it and used the soul magnetization technique. He really didn't know what the consequences would be. He probingly entered the mental plane of the horned demon and felt the activity of its thoughts. Of course, there were difficulties in translating. Sometimes he could understand it, but when it was reduced to words, the words wouldn't be able to convey the meaning. He would have to ponder over it endlessly. Luo Nan decided to work through the night in one spurt of energy. Yinlu had Luo Nan arrange 3 tasks for her. She was so busy that her feet didn't even touch the ground. Only Snake Tongue served her by her side. The habits of humans were very terrifying. Unconsciously, she had already gotten used to having someone serve her by her side, and Snake Tongue was the best. Luo Nan remembered that he still needed her to help him with his experiments before. But due to the accident in the laboratory in the wilderness, he had to fly several thousand kilometers away and fight back. But now, he still needed her. At the very least, he could refer to her at any time with the yarn of invisibility. Wouldn't he gain more inspiration? Time had no sense of existence in the face of concentration. Soon, it was midnight. Yinlu came back from her business to greet Luo Nan, but Luo Nan chased her off to rest. The lighting in the bedroom interweaved with the lighting in the virtual work area. They were all automatically adjusted to the most suitable and stable state. It seemed that they were going to continue like this forever. But at this time, muffled thunder sounded in the night sky of Ban City. Howling winds came at the same time. The wind was quite strong. Even though the yacht had already anchored into the harbor, it still trembled slightly. This was the omen of an impending storm. Snake Tongue, who had been massaging Luo Nan's shoulders, subconsciously took a deep breath. She didn't know why, but her chest felt a bit stuffy. Luo Nan's movements paused before she could think deeply. He laughed. A true god has returned. He seems to be in a terrible mood. Snake Tongue's mind was in a muddled state for an instant, but she immediately became alert. She made a quick and sharp connection. Is the Amaterasu order preparing to restart the project? Who knows? Luo Nan blurted out without thinking. He lowered his head and continued his translation work. Snake Tongue's gaze focused on Luo Nan's face. In the end, she lowered her eyelids and continued with her work. Her technique was the same as before. As for what state her mind was in, only she herself knew. No, the Lord beside him must have known as well. Time passed bit by bit. Dark thunder rumbled in Ban City. Dense clouds prevented rain, and the air grew more and more stuffy and dry. Snake Tongue obviously couldn't feel it inside the yacht, but her spirituality was clearly being suppressed and affected on the mental plane. According to the logic of Luo Nan's words, this was most likely the influence of a true god. Snake Tongue had been in Ban City for many years. She couldn't say that she wasn't used to strange sights, but she still had the ability to accept them. It was just that she was affected by the actions of the Amaterasu order 2 days ago. It was hard to avoid some divergent considerations. Georgia Wayman was probably shivering in fear. Luo Nan's voice suddenly cut into her ear. What's the temperament of a true god like? You've been in Ban City for so many years. Do you have some understanding? He's temperamental. He has an explosive temper. If he's a god, then he must be a very vile one. Snake Tongue quickly reacted. She made her own conclusion and evaluation. He's quite in tune with the atmosphere of the divine path in Ban City. Luo Nan burst out in laughter. Snake Tongue still had a sharp and sinister temperament deep in her bones. His curiosity was piqued, and he asked in passing. What about me? My lord. Yes. What about me? Snake Tongue didn't find this strange. Luo Nan had faintly placed himself on par with a true god's mentality. It was just that this so-called evaluation was close at hand. It would inevitably bring about all sorts of problems. She had no choice but to consider it. After several seconds of silence, Snake Tongue smiled and said, "From what I see, my lord really isn't gentle." The language of humans was truly marvelous. Snake Tongue clearly deviated on purpose with craftiness, but it involved the flow of dispersing on the mental plane. She went from a pool of stagnant water to a winding stream in a jungle. The complexity and subtlety of her emotions actually exceeded the scope of Luo Nan's understanding. Luo Nan couldn't figure it out for a time. He thought deeper and felt that it was ridiculous. He simply dispelled these distracting thoughts and responded faintly. Then I'm really sorry. He no longer spoke with Snake Tongue. He focused on his translation work once more. It was another sleepless night. Why don't we take this opportunity to meet? I'm just here in name to make things easier for everyone. I won't be participating in the specifics. Uncle Shou, you can make the decision. Little Zhang's voice was soft but firm. In the end, she reminded him again, of course it's good if we can negotiate, but if we can't, there's no need to force it. After all, Banqing is xenophobic, and the trade market is not a good place. We've already crossed the ocean to get here. Why should we care so much? The veteran was open-minded. The infected people are still resources. They won't be cleared out so quickly, but they won't let go so easily either. Since we've come to Banqing, we probably won't be able to return within a generation. It's good to have a foundation to let everyone settle down. A soft sigh came from the other side. Uncle Shou, thank you for your trouble. I should be the one thanking you. At this age, I don't have to worry about anything, but I can't help but take care of those bottles and cans, old and young. I can't do it, and it's all thanks to you. Uncle Shou. I said it a long time ago, this is to repay my conscience. Forget it, let's not talk about this. How are things on your side? Has the ownership of the laboratory been decided? Not yet. LRCF has been asking for a long time to buy it all together. It's been more than half a year, and they still haven't come to an agreement. Are they waiting for the Great Zay Church to collapse so that they can directly collect the trash? From a long-term legal perspective, LRCF's current investment and funding model will be less troublesome. But if there is a clear direction and we try to advance the project faster, it will be more efficient to integrate. I really want to know their direction, but looking at the situation in Banching, if we wait a little longer, collecting trash might also be a good business. Veteran laughed out loud, but in the end, he couldn't laugh anymore. Banching was in turmoil, and ordinary people like them, especially the living assets, who were detained on this piece of land, wouldn't have an easy time. Jiang Zhong was right, the peaceful trade market wasn't a good place. To put it bluntly, buying property here was just to create a beautiful bubble, to comfort the people. The call ended. Veteran sighed, patted his clothes, and went out. During the day, the peaceful trade market was centered around the trading center, and the prosperity radiated outwards, gradually decreasing. When he arrived at Veteran's Nest in Linshan, it was already very quiet. Most of the people went to work or to do business, and the entire residential area seemed empty, which was more in line with the traditional style of Banching. Veteran stood on the side of the street, waiting for Secretary Yin to come over. He was old, and he didn't have a good rest last night, so he couldn't help but yawn again. Mr. Mo, if you're more concerned about this, I'll take it into consideration. In fact, as long as it's a good workshop that can be rented, it's filled with expensive things, and the location is quite particular. Mr. Mo smiled and didn't say anything. The car drove away from the street. And just half a minute later, another black commercial car that had just driven past Veteran's place turned around and came back. This car looked like a business car on the outside, but the space inside was stingy and full of equipment and personnel. Only the main and front passenger seats were spacious. At this moment, the man with a crew cut in the front passenger seat was giving orders. Team 3, go in. Follow Supervisor Bai's instructions and do a good job. Don't rummage around like you're doing a forced search. We haven't reached that stage yet. As a frontline commander, his instructions were too long, and his lazy attitude had already affected his subordinates. Someone asked, Captain Jimmy, how long will that stage take? Go ask our beautiful Supervisor Bai. Captain Jimmy watched as the members of Team 3 sneaked into the suspect Veteran's house and put down the intercom. Suddenly, he thought of something and turned his head, his gaze stopping at the back half of the main car. Perhaps you can also ask our Honorable Mr. Neo. Come, use your brain and contribute a little more to the real world. At the end of Captain Jimmy's line of sight was a man in a hospital gown. His body was perfectly straight, but in fact, he was firmly confined by magnetic rings. At the same time, 7 or 8 tubes of different thicknesses were inserted into his mouth, nostrils, and even the skin on the back of his neck. They went up to his brain, and the ends were connected to the equipment on the side. This Mr. Neo had a blank expression, but the various electric signals extracted from his body formed a rather effective stream of information. A large number of blurry and shaky images were displayed in a specific projection area. There were some relatively clear figures inside, and they were constantly changing, including Veteran. Chapter 825. The middleman that Veteran introduced to Mr. Mo was a young man named Wu Li. He had a dark complexion and was as thin as a stick. At first glance, he looked like someone who was malnourished or a long-term drug addict. However, his eyes were bright, his steps were light, and his mind was fast. He only communicated with Mr. Mo for a few times before he figured out Mr. Mo's pulse. Although the workplace he chose was not satisfactory, it was still quite good. In more than an hour, they had gone to 3 locations. Mr. Mo did not feel annoyed, at least on the surface. Next was the 4th location. Veteran had joined in the fun earlier, but he gradually felt sorry. He pulled Wooly to the side and whispered in his ear, "Do you have any idea? He is not good at walking. You can't do anything from top to bottom." Wooly grinned, "Master, Mr. Mo has a beautiful secretary to serve him. What is there to do? What he needs, however, should be a high-end, well-equipped place that is quiet and able to withstand the torment. He is an expert. Practicality is the most important thing. Master, you are an old man. You have never fought a rich battle in your life. Moreover, you are a technician, and he is a boss. Your way of thinking is definitely different. I think Mr. Mo entered the workplace because he wants more inspiration. He doesn't care about the form or the process. In short, he was a money-burning boss." Wooly did not finish his words, but the veteran saw through him. He scratched the back of Wooly's head, telling him to restrain himself. It was not right to say that Wooly was cheating. He just kept hinting that there was a better choice than this one. He took advantage of Mr. Mo's high requirements for equipment and insensitivity to price, and raised his psychological threshold bit by bit to enjoy a higher premium. After getting back into the business car, Veteran apologized on behalf of Wooly. Although Mr. Mo did not say anything, it was good to make it clear in advance. Moreover, Veteran vaguely felt that Mr. Mo was a person with clear eyes and a clear heart. His disciples' thoughts might not be hidden from him, but Mr. Mo was magnanimous and did not care. The more it was like this, the more he had to lower his attitude. Mr. Mo laughed, "It's okay. I don't care about going to a few more locations. I just want to find a suitable working environment to deal with technical problems. You can say that I am looking for inspiration." Wooly, who was in the back seat, immediately hid his head in the waist of his trousers. The veteran turned around and glared at him. But judging from Mr. Mo's expression, he really didn't care. Mr. Mo really knows what he's doing, and he's standing at a higher position than us. He's also more knowledgeable, and he's a person who needs to expand. He said with a smile. "No, for now, I'm only doing some technical conversion work." It was a place where the large amount of black goods circulating in the vagrant exchange were legally laundered. The two formed a concentric structure. The inner vagrant exchange still strictly adhered to its internal rules. Only black market currency was circulated. There was only an official exchange rate that could be exchanged with all sorts of currencies in the outside world. For example, credits from the secular world, honor points from the inner world, and so on. But the normal trade market on the periphery provided a variety of forms. It bypassed the vagrant exchange channel to realize a more flexible and convenient transaction mode. One was relatively fixed, while the other fluctuated rapidly. The exchange itself was a benefit. Plus, this place was an important transfer base for the raw materials of marine aberrations. There was also a half-black half-white experimental base for infected aberrations. Naturally, this place became an important source of income for the government of Band City. It was also the best place to launder large amounts of money. And the black market currency was an important leverage. It was in high demand. Many specialized professions and products revolved around this. The Swipe the Question board was one of them. Due to the vagrant exchange's credit rating system, it gave every participant the opportunity to obtain a certain amount of black market currency for free. Many people relied on the system to swipe questions, unceasingly increasing their level and evaluation. They obtained black market currency to exchange. But every time they logged into the system, it was a test. If they failed the test again and again, their evaluation would be damaged. So some people thought of an idea. They used the method of ants moving houses to gradually transfer the credit test question bank out. They integrated it into the so-called Swipe the Question board to be used for daily practice. Although the questions in the question bank were as vast as the sea, there were always traces to follow for each profession. If they swiped a few times, they would have a bit of an impression of each question. Then, with a bit of luck, it was possible to jump 2 or 3 levels above their actual level. The higher the level, the more privileges one could enjoy in the vagrant exchange. In a certain sense, it wasn't something that could be measured by a few points. They're persuading people to make progress by swiping questions. Luo Nan gasped in amazement at the imagination of the people of Ban City. But what the hell was the external question bank and the advanced question bank? Chapter 826. An external question bank. Ian Lee's subsequent explanation was a bit more conservative. It said that the rating system's designer, or perhaps its maintainer, made this arrangement in order to expand the question bank. It allows users to create their own questions. Through a certain evaluation and filtering mechanism, questions that don't belong to the original question bank will be absorbed. Luo Nan asked curiously, "I've never seen this function before." Since it's an external question bank, it's not within the original system. It's an independent data center that connects to the vagrant exchanges of every major city through cloud technology. It also sets up subbanks. If the standard of the subbank's questions is high, then it's possible to be selected into the main bank and obtain higher profits. Luo Nan shook his head. It's this complicated. That's why it's a bullshit external question bank. On the other side, Old Han chuckled coldly. Originally, it was a simple unpractical training rating system. Now it's forcefully turned into a scam. Yinlu originally wanted to say something, but she was interrupted by Old Han, so she didn't say anything more. On the other side, Wooly pursed his lips. "Master, the official trading application has a self-creation function. How is it a scam? Also, we've relied on this to earn over 100 points in the past few years. We've also exchanged quite a few resources. It's not a small supplement." On Old Han's side, his anger flared up. He glared fiercely. "Bullshit, Ibyo. Pooh. It's true. We all crawled out from the wilderness. How come I don't know of any big shots who have mixed themselves into the officials? Also, do you know what big data is? It's just a tiny bit of profit. You've taken away all your treasures, and you're even happily helping others count their money. No way. We're just playing around. We shouldn't have put it up. We can probably hold on to it." Wooly was already a bit weak in the latter half of the conversation. His unpromising appearance made Old Han even more angry. He casually slapped Wooly's forehead. This kid Wooly and the other children under him were good at everything. They only cared about the small profits in front of them. It wasn't that they couldn't see things clearly. They simply didn't have any ambition. It was hard not to be a bit sad in the midst of his anger. Most of these young people had grown up holed up in Ban City for a few years. They were immigrants in name, but in reality, they were prisoners and even experimental subjects. How could they possibly have any ambitions? Not taking revenge on society was already a sign of pure nature. Luo Nan's gaze swept across this master and disciple pair. He didn't try to mediate the fight. He just lowered his head to size up the question board interface. The initial interface was just 2 sets of boxes and color blocks to choose from. It seriously lacked a sense of design, and it was almost identical to the system interface in Spring City. It could be considered one of the most simple ones he had seen in recent years. The other was the 100-year sequence test interface. It was this simple interface that formed a sharp contrast with the rich content. Luo Nan chose the direction of mechanical design, which he had tried before. What followed was different from last time. There was an additional level, and there were 3 options on top of it: combat simulation, unlimited questions, and browse index. He could roughly guess the meaning. Luo Nan first switched to the index interface. He had a general understanding of the question bank structure. Then he chose the infinite swipe question mode. He let the questions in the question bank appear one after another in the form of a waterfall. The operation was designed to be immersive. Regardless of whether the question was being answered or not, it could be switched infinitely. There was also a drop-down function, which was considered more user-friendly. Luo Nan casually switched to the questions on the swipe question board. He looked as he evaluated. His foundation in mechanical design was laid down by worker Zhai. He was more academic, and his design ideas were influenced by the virtual brain system. He used configuration thinking as a key link, and he had a myriad of experiences. Overall, his design was quite high-end. Now that he didn't have the pressure of a test, it was easier to form an overall impression by quickly browsing through the question bank. The questions on the swipe question board were clearly divided into two types. One type was the questions from the original question bank, or the questions that were similar in style. Regardless of the difficulty, they were relatively rigorous. They also tended to be practical. Some were even relatively old-fashioned. As for the other type, thanks to the creator of the swipe question board, there was a built-in ranking and filtering function. Luo Nan adjusted it to the premium recommendation level. Only then did he feel that the questions that appeared weren't as painful to the eyes. Luo Nan hurriedly flipped through a few pages before he finally gave his evaluation: deviant, difficult, dangerous, strange. Very eye-catching, but very interesting. Old Hand had just freed himself from his complex emotions when he gave Luo Nan a thumbs up. His meaning was that Luo Nan had hit the nail on the head. Luo Nan smiled at him. These newly created questions on the swipe question board, even if they were of an extremely high level, weren't necessarily rigorous. They were more imaginative and bold. And the mode of setting questions for others to do carried a certain sense of flaunting. This way, the train of thought of the person who set the questions would be exposed more clearly. What was being tested, what was being hidden, what was being flaunted, and what was the core of the questions could be discerned with a single glance. Luo Nan swept his gaze over and felt that he had a basic understanding of the overall style of mechanical design in Ban City. If he were to ponder deeply and extract a few processing techniques, it wouldn't be a problem. Oh, if he were to expand the scope, he removed the restriction of mechanical design and the amount of information suddenly exploded. Within the domain of the vagrant exchange, there were still topics related to distortion, alteration, biochemistry, and even supernatural powers. They were more common. Luo Nan even had the misconception that he was now an expert in the study of marine distortion species around Ban City. From hunting and gathering, to processing and processing, to design and manufacture, to practical use, all sorts of information was available. This was simply a database of distortion species in a region. Ban City was like this. If it was as Inlu said, then the 88 large metropolitan areas of the world were like this. Luo Nan understood Old Hand's meaning. Only an idiot would let go of such a rich resource of information. Speaking of which, Luo Nan seemed to have heard someone mention something similar before. He had some memories of this in his mind. Luo Nan couldn't recall it for a while, but he didn't force it. He switched the page to the ranking list of physics and specifically asked Old Hand, "Who are they?" Wooly blinked his eyes at his master and pointed them out to Luo Nan one by one with excitement. Hingduan's 7 tribes. Your unified logo. Luo Nan keenly discovered that the people who came up with the questions that Wooly was referring to all wore this logo after their IDs were verified. You could say that. Wooly grinned. His mood was clearly affected. It was Old Hand who explained, the tribe used to be mainly active in the vicinity of the Hingduan mountain range. After they moved to Ban City, they were divided into this order. The Hingduan mountain range. Near Spring City. Luo Nan suddenly asked. Old Hand chuckled, I've stayed in the vicinity before. But it's normal for the tribe to move back and forth. They've been to the basin, they've been to the plateau. There's no set number. Luo Nan went, oh. He didn't continue to get entangled on this topic. He decided to go through the dozens of self-created questions on the ranking list in more detail. During this time, the car had already reached its destination. Luo Nan didn't care. In any case, he didn't even need to move a finger. Yin Lo could serve him comfortably. Wooly winked at his master again and received another slap from Old Hand. This time, it was a slap to the back of his head. Wooly grimaced and moved to the front of Luo Nan's wheelchair. He cleared his throat and began to introduce the workshop and its surrounding environment. This used to be a small-scale Frost River reality branch store. I quite like to come here to play. But after 2 years, it couldn't hold on any longer, so I sold it. I partitioned it into a professional workshop like this one and rented it out. Many manufacturers do their after-sales maintenance here. Of course, most of the goods sold in the trade market aren't consumer goods. There are very few idle people here. It can be considered a quiet place amidst the noise. Frost River reality. Luo Nan raised his gaze from the question board. He seemed to be deep in thought. It's rare for a Frost River reality branch store to not be able to continue operating in the world. It was rare for Yin Lu to express her opinion. It was probably because of her previous experience as an executive of Frost River Reality's flagship store. Wooly responded with a chuckle, in the end, the trade district isn't the CBD. Everyone is working during the day. It's normal for them to work at night. Adults who trade their lives for money, who would have the leisure to come here every day. Plus, the machines are easy to break, and the fees are crazy expensive. Old Hand glared at him. You guys fight here every day. You think you're in the right. Get to the point. Luo Nan had just woken up from his daze. The familiar feeling from before should be from Frost River reality. Indeed, it should be from one of the games. He turned to look at Yin Lu. Your previous project, 10 Days in the Wilderness, should have the corresponding data to support it. Yin Lu was startled for a moment before she said, definitely. A large-scale reality game like 10 Days in the Wilderness requires a massive amount of real-world data. She understood Luo Nan's meaning when she spoke to this point. She turned to smile at Wooly. Maybe you guys contributed to it. Wooly was embarrassed and speechless. That's right. The virtual reality technology of the Frost River waterway was able to perfectly integrate into the archetype format's training mode. This made Luo Nan very amazed, but he was also very unwilling to accept it. He had once asked He Yuan for some understanding. The specific details were a bit blurry. He only remembered the gist of it. According to what she said, there were many major powers from all over the world that were providing technical support for the Frost River Reality project. In terms of big data, all sorts of channels were used to collect real-time information from all over the world. They were transmitted, updated, categorized, analyzed, and processed at all times. The question board was small, and the questions were intermingled with good and bad ones. But as long as they were collected online, with the support of enormous computing power and algorithms, large amounts of unstructured and semi-structured data could be effectively organized. A considerable portion of the data could even be reintegrated into a complete data model and be fully utilized. The Frost River Waterway was a virtual reality game. It was developed by many parties, and there were military and political forces involved. This was the root of the game. Humanity's counterattack against the mutants on all fronts in recent years was absolutely not due to the appearance of the Deep Blue platform. This was an enormous and orderly accumulation. It was an inevitable process from quantitative change to qualitative change. There was no doubt that this information was not free. It was more or less in the hands of several powers. Through complex cross-licensing, limited and paid sharing was realized. How salivating, Luo Nan sighed. Suddenly, the external neuron began to tremble. A pop-up window popped up on the virtual brain interface. Do you want to import? Chapter 8:27. The external neuron had been very active for the past 2 days. Perhaps the negligible increase in privileges brought about some changes after the confirmation and review process was initiated. Reality proved that Luo Nan's guess was correct. He could see from the detailed information that the Heaven Stairway Level 4 knowledge access privileges allowed him to carry out the operation of importing external data, complementing and perfecting the offline database. If he confirmed that the data was not available in the main database, he would receive some rewards. It was possible to increase his privilege rating. Of course, this would have to wait until he connected to the so-called Heaven Abyss network and established a link with the main database. Perhaps this function was something like an information hunter. Right now, he could only be considered a librarian. Data was easy to deal with, but the matter of connecting to the internet was too far away. Luo Nan did not hope to rely on it to increase his privileges in the short term. However, the virtual brain system was the basic function of the database. It would also process the imported data, providing analysis, integration, modeling, and other application services. If he was able to experience the big data application technology of the mysterious alien civilization, then this trip would not be a loss. Luo Nan immediately clicked yes. He wanted to see what the result would be. However, the system immediately refreshed with new information, coldly shattering his wishful thinking. The system is loading external data. It is in in-depth analysis mode. Cannot be interrupted. Non-homologous data will automatically enter the next sequence. Fine, you're the boss. Luo Nan laughed in spite of himself. He was not in a hurry. But his thoughts turned, and he discovered that some of the characters were quite familiar. It seemed to be the influence of the offline test. The external neuron seemed to be far from being able to completely absorb the information of the abyss world that he had deposited through the altar spiderweb. This was his own fault. He had to obediently accept it. Oh, wait a moment. Luo Nan's mind suddenly bypassed a subtle point. Speaking of which, when he passed the offline test, he had raised the single privilege of a knowledge access. Only then could he have the function of importing external data. Before this, the external deity's data system, which was connected to his magical energy, was more or less in a read-only state. Then, during the offline test, he had relied on the information deposited through the altar spiderweb to pass the test. Wasn't the experience of the instantaneous increase in power equivalent to a cheat sheet? In essence, he had copied the reference answer from the database he controlled. This answer was rooted in the abyss world. Thinking about it this way, the relationship between the abyss world, the external neuron, and Luo Nan himself was quite subtle. No matter what, the data had to be imported. What Luo Nan wanted wasn't just to brush the pitiful 100 or so gigabytes of data on the question board. He wanted to dig deeper. Not only did he want to dig up the data in Ban City, but he also wanted to dig up all the major data centers in the world if he had the chance. He wanted to see which was better, the priceless data storage and processing system or the external neuron. Stones from other mountains can be used to improve jade. Luo Nan had to admit that this idea was quite shameless. However, he still hoped that he could use this method to sort out the information he had accumulated during this period of time and come up with a clearer context. It must be known that Luo Nan's soul cloak could be found all over the world. It was an extremely high-end data collection system, but it was limited by his own brainpower. It did not possess the ability to conduct in-depth analysis and calculation. He could only rely on the external neuron's built-in applications, such as the assembly interface, to conduct filtering. As the external neuron's built-in database was too high-end and not down-to-earth, many of them were not suitable for Earth's existing environment. In particular, the processing capabilities were seriously unmatched, and most of the plans given were impractical. Under these circumstances, Luo Nan urgently wanted to know what the result would be if he were to combine the virtual brain system with Earth's real data, as well as the precipitated information from the Abyss world. But it was useless for him to be anxious right now. He could only obediently line up. Mr. Mo, what do you think? This place. Not bad. Most of Luo Nan's thoughts had shifted to the virtual brain system. He didn't pay much attention to Wu Li's explanation of the reality plane. But after 3 rounds of grinding, Wu Li, this clever devil, had basically grasped Luo Nan's context. He had more or less calculated the corresponding premium. The workshop introduced this time was already very close to Luo Nan's needs. Luo Nan had more or less understood this point before he got off the car. He had come to find the veteran today. He wanted to find a suitable workshop to research the lamination interference technique and the corresponding creation techniques. This was indeed one of the most important reasons. But there was another reason. He wanted to go a step further in communicating with the veteran. He wanted to establish a natural and close relationship with this former vagrant of the wilderness who seemed to be old friends with his father, mother, and grandfather. The current trend was pretty good, but there was still a lot of room for improvement. Therefore, Luo Nan didn't focus the conversation on the workshop. Instead, he waved the question board in his hand. I just looked at it. The self-created questions on it have very solid fundamentals. Some of the ideas are quite brilliant. If these are able to represent the true level of the technicians under Master Show, then it's quite decent. Of course. If it weren't for Master teaching us to keep a low profile, then it wouldn't be a problem for us to dominate the rankings. Wu Li could already see the intent of cooperation in the veteran's heart after getting along for so long. He advocated with even more vigor, making it easier for him to take the initiative in future negotiations. Luo Nan just smiled. He didn't respond to Wu Li's words at all. He just said to the veteran, I've only skimmed through the external question bank of Ban City. It seems that the regional characteristics are quite strong. I've also seen the feasibility study report that Secretary Yin gave me. In the area surrounding Ban City, the manufacturing and processing of mutant materials, even if it's high-end products, are basically made from the surrounding marine mutant species. The coverage is a bit smaller. It should be due to the limitations of raw materials. It could be said that Mr. Mo is an expert. The veteran glared at Wu Li and grinned. He made a circle with his thumb and index finger. Frogs at the bottom of a well can only see the sky this big. These kids think that they're awesome just by pondering a few products. I hope you don't mind my words, Mr. Mo. Luo Nan really didn't mind. He laughed and said, it's nothing. The veteran's words were followed by words. He also added gold to his kids, but it's just like you said, Mr. Mo. Their fundamentals are quite solid. They're also much younger than me. They accept new things very quickly. The business in T-City actually has quite a bit of commonality. Luo Nan shook his head. It's not like that. Luo Nan handed the already useless question board back to Wu Li. Wu Li received it like an idiot. Right now Luo Nan was sitting in a wheelchair. He was shorter than everyone present, but he grasped the rhythm of the entire scene. He even grasped everyone's mentality. Actually, Secretary Yin knows the best. The acquisition of a processing plant isn't necessarily a large business. The most direct goal is to serve me personally. Personally. The veteran still didn't quite understand Luo Nan's meaning. Luo Nan explained to him very patiently, I used to lean towards theoretical research and the mental side. Even though I've learned a few things on and off in terms of design and processing, my practical ability is quite poor. If I want to produce results in a short period of time, I need a high-level technical team to help me realize some of my designs. This is the main goal of my acquisition of the processing plant. Right now, even Yin Lo was very surprised, let alone the veteran and Wu Li. She was mostly baffled as to why the boss was so sincere to the veteran and the others. He subconsciously locked gazes with his own apprentice, wanting to confirm this information, going out for training, leaving Band City. At this moment, the veteran and Wooly could clearly hear each other's thumping heartbeats. Chapter 828. D City, Spring City, Xia City, G City. Even Woyang City on the other side of the ocean. As long as it can help me improve, I can consider it. Luo Nan blurted out the names of the cities he was more familiar with. Objectively speaking, there was a suspicion of exaggeration. However, when it came to expression and speech, this kind of parallelism was definitely very effective. Not to mention that Yinluo was helping him. Though Yinluo didn't understand why Luo Nan didn't communicate with her beforehand and suddenly said this, one of her duties as a secretary was to support her boss. She began to rack her brain from the moment Luo Nan brought up this topic. She keenly grasped the opportunity to cut into the topic, taking advantage of the situation to supplement and perfect it. The Castle Financial Group has always had a system of commissioned students. They have cooperated with many famous schools, enterprises, and even the military all over the world. We are happy to give talents with potential a chance to improve further. Of course, we need to sign a training agreement that is in line with the interests of both parties and in accordance with the law. The length of service must also be extended accordingly. That would be more reasonable, more realistic. Veteran Hand and 5 centimeters were breathing heavily, but they didn't even realize it. Mr. Mo's gentle voice continued to seep into their ears and minds. Wei Peixing is an existing system. If you're interested, you can ask Secretary Yin about it. I have no one to speak of. I don't expect everyone on Master Show's side to be talented, but as long as 1 or 2 of them can meet my requirements and be of use to me, I will have achieved my investment goal. The veteran felt that he could no longer hold on. The various worries and barriers in his heart instantly cracked under the plan that the other party seemed to have prepared for a long time. It was just a matter of blowing a breath away from complete collapse. However, Mr. Mo stopped here and returned to the nominal topic of the day. This is it. I'm very satisfied. What procedures do I need to go through if I want to rent it? I'll go get it done. I'll go get it done. Wooly felt as if he had just woken up from a dream under the illumination of Luo Nan's gaze. He went to contact the service staff in a flurry. Seizing this opportunity, Veteran Hand deeply adjusted his breathing and calmed down the pain that was hard to control because he had struck his ribs. He also felt joy that was almost uncontrollable. At the very least, it was a form of hope. If the young people in the tribe could take advantage of this cooperation to escape from this cage and live openly under the sun, all the joint venture purchases would not be an obstacle. Right now, the biggest problem was the disparity between the other party's plan and their status as mutants. Mr. Mo's plan was an idealized operation based on technology. He was indeed very capable, but could he break the tacit understanding and agreement between Sakura City, LRCF, and even the major forces in the world? Or to put it more bluntly, was he willing to touch this taboo? Rationally, the veteran was still pessimistic. But no matter what, the other party at least came up with a plan, giving them a glimmer of hope. The veteran could no longer remain calm. Should he talk to Mr. Mo now and tell him about the restrictions they were under? Or should he immerse himself in hope for a while longer before facing the cruel reality? While the conversation in the workshop continued, another black MPV in the trade market ended its several-hour-long cruise and returned to an independent warehouse not far from the dock. During this period of time, the originally empty warehouse had been transformed into a simple command center. The warehouse space of nearly 1,000 square meters still seemed a little empty after filling in all kinds of equipment and people, but, soon, this place will be filled up. Captain Jimmy jumped out of the car. Behind him, his subordinates were carefully unloading the most important asset in the car, Mr. Neo, who had a tube inserted into the back of his head. The direct goal of the few hours of cruise was to stimulate the memory of Neo, who had been to the trade market before, and to stir up more information from the depths of his brain. With the dual effects of brainwave interference and reading equipment, the results were remarkable. At least, Captain Jimmy was already relatively satisfied. The captive captured on the night of the 7th had exchanged almost everything in a day's time. The only pity was that this guy did not know about the latest structure of the shelter. But it didn't matter. The core council of the Soul Church in the deep blue world had already been destroyed. The struggles of these stray dogs did not affect the overall situation. He arrived at the intelligence analysis platform. The positions of a dozen or so important people had already been anchored here. With the help of the SCA's authority system and the existing monitoring equipment in the trade market, they were being tracked throughout the entire process. For some special people, Jimmy had even arranged for a small fry. Wei Pei-sheng and the like are already in place. The voice of Mr. Mo was clearly reproduced in the command center, causing Captain Jimmy to sneer. Veteran Shoshiong was the clearest in Neo's memory, and it seemed that he was also one of the most important contacts. Of course, he had to be given special treatment, and the 2 investors from the Blood Flame Order were also put under surveillance. The movements of the group of 4 over the past 2 hours were all displayed on the 3D map of the trade market. Their every move was also immediately reproduced under the care of specially arranged monitoring and imaging equipment. She's been hanging out with that guy from the Yuchuan family for the past 2 days, so she can help. Captain Jimmy grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Pack up all the information we've collected and send it over. If there are any problems that need to be solved, tell her and ask for instructions from her. I heard that at the end of last year, because she didn't take a vacation, her performance was deducted completely. If she wants to turn things around this year, she'll definitely be more proactive than us. As he spoke, the intelligence officer in charge of organizing the data had already obeyed his order and sent out the corresponding information. Captain Jimmy smiled in satisfaction and temporarily left the intelligence analysis platform. As he walked, he cracked his neck, and the joints of his neck bones creaked. There was also the sound of special metal being stretched, and only he could feel the subtle vibrations. He wasn't worried about any big movements. The dynamo core had already been updated to the 7th generation, and it had pushed him to complete a complete transformation. He was the first batch of deep blue walkers to complete this kind of change. Even Tian Bang, who had made a name for himself last year and was known as the #1 person below the extraordinaries, had only just begun testing the 6th generation of products. Thanks to Professor Luo, if it wasn't for his cage theory, the experimental reality wouldn't have been able to complete the new generation of products so quickly. Right now, he couldn't wait to test it out in real combat. Even though he might not even need to do anything against this motley crew. From the warehouse, he could vaguely see the upper deck of the luxurious yacht from the distant pier. Investors of the Blood Flame Order. It would be fine if they were tactful, but if they were stubborn enough to get involved, he didn't mind using this order, which was going downhill, as a sacrificial target. Captain, Supervisor Bai's orders. Captain Jimmy snapped his fingers. Okay, get ready. Captain. The intelligence officer's voice was somewhat hoarse. Wait a moment, Supervisor Bai has refused to authorize us. Captain Jimmy suddenly turned around. What kind of joke is this? Chapter 829. Supervisor Bai, regarding the arrest operation, I hope you can give me a clearer instruction. Captain Jimmy felt that his authority as a leader had been seriously challenged after making a fool of himself in front of his subordinates. He immediately called Bai Xinyan and taunted her back in a seemingly polite but actually forceful manner. The response from the other side was very flat. Then, you can rest here and continue monitoring if you have nothing to do. The only thing you are not allowed to do is make any arrests. Do you understand? What was with this unusually arrogant attitude? Captain Jimmy did not care about his tone. He had never taken Bai Xinyan seriously in the past. Today, he was unexpectedly hit with a stick. Now that he had to respond, the other party's attitude was like adding fuel to the fire. He unconsciously raised his voice. Reason. Overall judgment. What a good reason. Captain Jimmy could no longer maintain his polite facade. The only thing that drove him to continue speaking was the long distance that his fists could not reach. He could only smash his fist against the wall of the warehouse and explain his reason through gritted teeth. From Neo, we can confirm that there are missionaries from the soul cult who have made contact with the nomads of the 7 tribes and are preaching. The fish that slipped through the net 2 nights ago has most likely re-established contact with them. That person is an important person who has control of the shelter's new core configuration. If we allow him to spread this configuration and allow the soul cult to rise from the ashes, who among us can bear the responsibility? The configuration is only a standard, there are no secrets. As for the soul cult, as long as they use this method to preach, they are destined to lose everything. Bai Xinyan was still calm and collected. She did not mind debating with Captain Jimmy. As long as we know the people involved, it doesn't matter if it's the new version or the old version. It's not difficult for us to analyze it. As long as we can decipher it, with the characteristics of the shelter, the faster it spreads, the greater the harvest will be. Why not? Of course, I'm just saying this casually. Currently, the situation in Ban City is very complicated. There are a few people with strong influence and leadership who are not emotionally stable. I don't want a problem that could have been easily solved to become a problem because of someone's violent style. How about this explanation? Captain Jimmy's head was about to explode from anger. You directly pointed out names. Don't you feel tired of beating around the bush? Bai Xinyan's low chuckle came through the communicator. This is indeed a problem of understanding. Of course, there are some small taboos. As the commanding officer of the operation team who has undergone strict training, you should have this basic quality. Chapter 830. My memories of that time have always been blurry, and I have been brooding over it. Back then, that experience was like a divine revelation. It was an easy harvest. It made me, a backpacker who had always been restless, to the point that I took the initiative to venture into the wilderness, wild with joy. As time passed and my understanding of the divine revelation deepened, it easily became a burden. Knowledge and energy are completely different. The latter can be transformed in many forms, but knowledge itself shouldn't have fallen from the sky. It shouldn't have been forcefully stuffed into one's memories. I don't like the reason divine revelation. I wanted to have a process of cognition, understanding, and digestion. This is more in line with the value of this knowledge itself. Therefore, I traced back, hoping to be able to straighten out the entire vein. Dean Wan was a person with a story. Luo Nan read Dean Wan's reply and felt rather moved by some of the passages. This was the first time he knew that Dean Wan's exquisite and profound creation law system was obtained in such a way. Inevitably, Luo Nan had a few relevant and reasonable conjectures regarding the source of this system. Dean Wan most likely thought the same. Therefore, he was very interested in the information released by the Horned Demon about the Wilderness Laboratory. He didn't have to travel 1,000 miles to investigate. In the past, Luo Nan and Dean Wan had a friendly relationship, but it wasn't to the point of confiding in each other. However, Luo Nan's translation of the lamination interference technique had a powerful catalytic effect. It had indeed achieved the effect that Luo Nan hoped for, everything is understood without words. But with the temperament of the two, they wouldn't talk too deeply about this problem. In fact, this was only a small portion of Dean Wan's series of replies. It was a sudden sigh. The main content was still deciphering the material. The lamination interference dynamo core technique is my favorite type. There aren't many mechanics, and there are few assumptions. It is established on the basis of sufficient observation and material collection. It excavates the existing laws of the world, as well as positive interactions with humans. Show them and use them. The world is material in the end. Its ultimate form of expression is material. It requires material products to serve as proof. The author of the article has shown us the exquisite transformation from one material form to another material form. There are many illusions in the world that confuse the senses, but this is not one of them. This is a flow process that changes at will. Every link can stand up to scrutiny, showing the absolute beauty of the eternal change of the material world. When people were awed by this beauty, the author had achieved his goal. The biggest limitation of using this technology comes from ourselves. Whether we have the ability to understand and reproduce its aesthetics, as well as the material basis to match the aesthetics, Dean Wan was full of praise for the information on the stacking interference technology, and some of it was even sublimated to the point of poetry. However, most of it was still the analysis of the specific content, which was basically a careful reading of word by word. The various flaws of Luo Nan's forceful translation were undoubtedly exposed under this sort of study. He was forced to constantly rework, checking for loopholes and filling in the gaps. Only then was he able to resist Dean Wan's powerful and strict logic. However, Luo Nan obtained even more. A lot of experience, calculations, and speculations were no longer limited to the lamination interference technology itself, but included the reflection of Director Wan's entire knowledge structure. All of this was presented in front of them through the text, graphics, and even the content of the demonstration sent back by President Wan. It was impossible for all of this to be transmitted all at once. In fact, this was already the sixth wave of feedback that Luo Nan had received. It was a vast book of over 100,000 words, but it was only a cursory reading of the entire material and a small part of it. With Dean Wan's help, Luo Nan was able to read very thoroughly, even though he had only read a small portion of the material. He had basically grasped the core concept of this material. The intricate structure design had been deciphered almost perfectly. Only the most important part, as well as the most important part, was the processing, both the material and Dean Wan liked to call it the creation stage. It was here that he encountered the same old problem as before. The processing environment and requirements of the mysterious extraterrestrial civilization were far superior. The disparity with the simple and crude conditions of Earth formed a barrier that was hard to surmount for a time. In the past, Luo Nan could only completely rely on the virtual brain system when he encountered this sort of thing. He followed the calculations of its intelligence to reduce, and reduce again until he could bear it. The exoskeleton laid with the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure was the product of this subtraction, and it was also the final plan that could only be realized after the God-binding hoop and the biological reactor were two hard goods. But this time, neither Luo Nan nor Dean Wan had any intentions of compromising. They didn't consider creating a high-end psychic core product in a short amount of time, but they didn't want to make do with it. They just researched and pondered bit by bit, starting from the core concept that was already relatively clear. They first did subtraction, then they did addition. They saw if they could find a winding and complicated path that would allow them to bypass this obstacle in the end. We need to start from configuration design. The greater the material conditions, the greater the changes in configuration design. The lamination interference technology is a mature plan. Even though there are restrictions here and there, it is already close to being a public product. We can basically confirm that it can be used by the majority of people at the corresponding level. But we don't need to consider this situation. First, we can make a private version that meets certain conditions. Perhaps this will be closer to the author's original design. This was Dean Wan's train of thought. It was indeed very reasonable. Then the core responsibility of changing the design was pressed onto Luo Nan's shoulders. This wasn't cheating. Dean Wan believed that Luo Nan's level of configuration design was far above his own. Luo Nan was the best and most suitable choice in the world. As for Luo Nan, even though he communicated with Dean Wan and asked for help from the Wan court, he wasn't willing to let someone else handle this important link. After all, this was something that belonged to him and his family. He had always believed this. Since a consensus was reached, another round of research had arrived. There is a fundamental difference between imitation and plagiarism. Being able to design and being able to do it are two different things. It's an excellent train of thought, but these problems appeared when I repeated it. The problem with the secondary structure needs to be explained clearly. I don't understand it, and I think it's too complicated. It doesn't conform to the refinement and elegance of the design itself. My opinion is. Back and forth discussions, learning, borrowing, and even debates and quarrels took up the majority of Luo Nan's time. Well, no quarrels were more painful than quarrels. Luo Nan and Dean Wan did not use instant messaging tools in order to guarantee the security and privacy of the data and communications. Instead, they used the psychic wave network of the Xia City branch to conduct encrypted mail transmissions. The more restricted the communication, the more the two sides needed to rack their brains. They needed to thoroughly research the issues raised by the other side, and then transcribe a sufficiently persuasive reason. It was very difficult to mix emotional things into this. It needed to be rigorous and thorough, or else it would just be a waste of an opportunity to communicate. It would delay the progress of both sides. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was a novel feeling that he rarely experienced. There were some aspects of thinking that he might never be able to touch, but they were cornerstone-like existences to Dean Wan. The enormous gap between priority and backwardness would inevitably lead to conflict. In the end, it was possible to reach an agreement. It was possible for both sides to compromise, but it was also possible for them to shelve it. But even so, the efficiency was still increasing. There was a qualitative difference between one person and two people. The pleasant surprise of having an outstanding answer placed in front of one's eyes as soon as one opened one's eyes was extremely refreshing. Luo Nan would not slack off because of this. He hoped that Dean Wan felt the same way. Use your strengths. Be anxious for my needs. Be more realistic. Be more pragmatic. I still have to walk the mental side. The most malleable thing in the body and soul framework is soul strength. Dean Wan's brain was a lump of wood. It seems that I can do a bit of work with the structure of space and time. This kind of structure is very ambiguous in the virtual brain system. It is considered to be on the material side, but there is also a core of the mental side. Combining the strengths of the two is a bit interesting. Luo Nan muttered to Dean Wan and the principles he set himself as he continued the design process. The virtual work area had complex configuration lines, but what flashed through his mind was only 10 times, 100 times more. He had inspiration. He just persevered in searching for the most suitable one. This was the image of Mr. Mo that veteran saw when he came in. There was no greeting. Perhaps Mr. Mo didn't discover his arrival at all. Or perhaps Mr. Mo didn't have any intention of diverting his attention. Veteran Han didn't get angry. Miraculously, Luo Nan's nagging, chanting sutras unconsciously eased his stomach full of grievances and oppressiveness. He stabilized the moving frame that he had pushed over and found a chair in the workshop. He rested for a while, not opening his mouth. He just let Luo Nan continue to chant. He was very familiar with this scene. In the past, when he was pondering over designs and repairing things in the wilderness, it was basically like this when he encountered a difficult problem. How could there be such a peaceful environment back then? On the plateau and in the mountains, the howling of the wind and the roars of beasts could be heard from time to time. There were even the sounds of explosions and fighting. They disturbed him all the time. In those times, only talking to himself and forming a domain could help him concentrate his mind until he entered a state of high concentration. This sort of situation practically disappeared after arriving in Band City. Even if he researched some things, his goal wasn't as pure as it was back then. Hee. It must be the beautifying effect of his memories. Veteran never cared to beautify his past experiences. But as he grew older, he couldn't help but reminisce about them. Occasionally, he would dream about them in the middle of the night, and it was as if he had returned to the wilderness where life and death swayed. He even often thought about it. If only he could have died a happy death back then. That would certainly be the most perfect ending. A sudden vibration from his wrist interrupted his thoughts at this time. It seemed to affect the rhythm and atmosphere of the room. Luo Nan's gaze shifted from behind the workbench. His brows furrowed. Chapter 831. The wristband vibrated silently, but it created an abnormal effect. For a moment, the veteran felt that his face was a little numb. He didn't know if it was because of Mr. Mo's piercing gaze. He hurriedly tried to turn it off, but it was too late. The veteran could only smile awkwardly. He first nodded to apologize to Mr. Mo, then looked at the contact person. Soon, his old face sank. It was that bastard occupant Rongsan. The anger in his heart burst out again, but he didn't want to disturb Mr. Mo, so he got up and walked out. When he was about to go out, he finally couldn't help but say stiffly, "If it's still the same words, there's no need to talk anymore." He really didn't talk for long. In less than 2 minutes, he turned back from outside the house. At this time, he saw Mr. Mo standing in front of the mobile shelf he brought, looking at the hanging exoskeleton frame, and rubbing it with his hands to test it. The rough skeleton on the shelf was really a skeleton. It was called an exoskeleton, but it wasn't the time to design the appearance yet. Everything was simple. It was just bones pieced together in various ways. Just looking at the details, it was good craftsmanship, but looking at the whole thing, it didn't look like it. The main material of the assembled bones was an amphibious mutant called Ox Demon in Band City. Yes, it was made from the prototype of the mutant dark dragon god wilderness spirit worshipped by the Great Zay cult. It was also ironic that the processing plant where the veteran worked belonged to the Great Zay society controlled by the Great Zay cult, but in this factory, the most representative source of high-end processing materials was the Ox Demon. A considerable part of its technology came from the Great Zay cult. The veteran then knew not to take the so-called faith in Band City seriously. It was just that. "I'm sorry for what happened just now." The veteran still wanted to express his apology, but Mr. Mo raised his hand to stop him. "Don't mind it, let's talk business." "Oh, the processing of this set of exoskeleton was done according to your instructions. The inner marrow of the Ox Demon was activated, and then redesigned and pieced together. Every piece of bone is processed according to the sample standard you gave me before. I've also worked on every piece." After going through a special process, the skeleton was dark yellow and slightly transparent. The outer layer seemed to be smeared with a layer of wax. It was oily and slightly bumpy to the touch. While he was speaking, Mr. Mo did something, but the rough skeletons hanging on the shelves creaked and let out a dense, sizzling sound. At first, it sounded like an electric shock, but later, it sounded more like a boiling liquid. Under the dark yellow wax that had been processed, one could also see the expanding and bursting bubbles. After another second, the orange flames ignited with a whoosh. Chapter 832. Right now, many people in Band City were restless. From Luo Nan's perspective, he just lived his life as he should. There were many things to do in the last 2 or 3 days, but they weren't complicated. He even felt that things were simpler. But for other people, the feeling was completely different. 3 days had passed since Luo Nan and the true God engaged in a long-distance battle on the night of May 8th. Since then, the true God returned to Ban City and threw a huge tantrum, so much so that the weather in Ban City was affected. It was true that the power of extraordinaries was inconceivable, but no matter how inconceivable a true God was, he was still a living being. It was impossible for the material world to withstand the influence of the true God's emotional fluctuations. In fact, the impact on the mental plane was the most direct. It was just that the majority of the power stirred up a storm in the abyssal region. What sank into the sea of consciousness was merely the aftermath. Then there were the aftermath waves, which lasted for dozens of hours. It was more than enough for people to enjoy. This was especially true for the half-baked veteran. His bubble cage in the sea of consciousness was sturdier than that of an ordinary person, but it couldn't compare to that of a truly powerful person. He was tainted with many negative things for no reason, and they slowly sank into his heart. It was equivalent to a chronic poison. The size of the effect depended on the dosage. There would certainly be benefits in relieving the effects early. This was the result of Luo Nan's observations, but it was only a small part of the overall conclusion. Luo Nan could use some small tricks to help the veteran resolve the effects, but it was not easy to accomplish on a broader and deeper level. For example, old injuries, mutant infections, and the natural process of aging. If the veteran were to be the center, then everything would be filled with imbalances and incongruities. This old man, who had abundant experiences in the first half of his life, would gradually lose the opportunity to adjust the balance. He would endlessly consume his life force, and he would walk toward his predestined end. People still had to go through a considerable stage to experience it with their senses. But in terms of pure calculation, the feeling of seeing the answer with a glance was not too comfortable. Putting himself in Luo Nan's shoes and experiencing it on this basis, the feeling was even more difficult to describe. But Luo Nan still wanted to study. He didn't just study the veteran. He also studied the various people around him. In the end, he transformed the results of his observations into his own body, forming a conclusion. The conclusion came from him, spread to others, and returned to him. Thus, a complete chain of standards, observations, and corrections was formed. As for the standards of observation, Luo Nan had long since grasped the basic principles of matching the structure of body and soul. He had used his mother's coupling theory in conjunction with Gym Master Xiu's 9 orifices 6 roots technique to gradually fumble his way out. Luo Nan possessed an extremely strong personal style. Now that he had combined it with the concept of extraterrestrial civilization described by the lamination interference technology and verified it with each other, regardless of whether it was compatible or not, it was still an experience. He set his sights higher and gradually formed an ideal outline. He used this standard to examine himself and the physical and spiritual framework of the people around him. There was no doubt that most of them, including him, were defective goods. This won't work. As expected, I still have to invest elsewhere. What? Old Han thought that Mr. Mo was talking to him, so he turned around. Luo Nan shook his head. He just said, "There's no need to change the basic design. Can you handle the fine-tuning of the details now? Of course, the rent for this workshop is high, but the equipment is complete." There was no need to return to the factory. It would only take half an hour at most. However, I need your cooperation. Oh. Old Hand emptied his mind when it came to the field of expertise. His voice was raised by half a pitch. This toy is rough, but it's still an exoskeleton. It's also custom-made. It needs to be adjusted according to the actual situation. Mr. Mo is using it for himself, right? It's best to get on it and take a look. Makes sense. Luo Nan readily accepted the advice, even though there was a bit of difference between the actual situation and what Old Hand imagined. At this time, Old Hand was a bit hesitant. Is it convenient? Luo Nan laughed when he saw Old Hand's gaze cast at his legs. That was right. He was still a disabled person. Actually, a few days of time was enough for the replaced spinal nerves to fully integrate with his body. He didn't even sit in a wheelchair indoors anymore. When he went out, he reluctantly sat in a wheelchair for the sake of maintaining his persona. Old Hand only knew that Mr. Mo was recovering from his injuries. He was worried that it would cause a relapse. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Luo Nan took 2 steady steps and assumed a stance. He indicated to Old Hand to help him put the exoskeleton, which still had a bit of warmth, on his body. It was a simple and crude exoskeleton frame. The power and conduction devices weren't installed. It was more like a burden to forcefully put it on his body. But Old Hand was an expert in this field. Luo Nan had a good grasp of the situation. He gave it a simple test on his body and roughly understood the situation. The load-bearing spine is conservative. The flexibility can be adjusted a bit. It's fine if it's not carrying weight. If you want flexibility, the lower limbs can be adjusted. The joint design can be changed. There's no need to make such a big move. Old Hand wasn't clear on Mr. Mo's usage route, but Luo Nan was very clear on the use of this crude exoskeleton in the restoration process of the lamination interference technique. There were some functions that weren't necessary, but there were some functions that needed to be perfected. He issued an order to the Windows system within the external neuron, changing the projection mode from a design perspective to an experiential perspective. The virtual work area behind the workbench disappeared. Then the radiance of the projection sprinkled down on an area of several square meters with Luo Nan at the center. The radiance completely covered him, merging him with the projection area as one. It wasn't very convenient for ordinary people to use this mode. They needed to coordinate with other tools to perform self-reflection, but Luo Nan didn't need this at all. He was able to inspect and grasp the situation of his entire body just by relying on his mental senses. He also had the spare capacity to control the projection area. He carried out fine adjustments to make it conform to the material structure on the plane of reality. Luo Nan's series of operations were actually more convenient for Old Hand. Old Hand was soon able to clearly distinguish the layers of the structure from the blurred and chaotic light and shadow effects. It was as if he had received a specialized demonstration. 1, 2, 3. Old Hand counted seriously. He confirmed that Mr. Mo had consciously divided the design of his virtual work area into 3 layers. Mr. Mo himself was in the innermost layer, the core layer. The crude exoskeleton frame was in the second layer, the middle layer. The outermost layer was a virtual 3D structure drawn purely from dots of light, lines, symbols, and shadows. It was extremely complex and inexplicable. Old Hand narrowed his eyes for a long time, but he was unable to find the meaning behind it. So he tactfully shut his mouth. He no longer used his old experience to frame Mr. Mo's train of thought. He didn't know what Mr. Mo was planning in the end, but he could confirm that this definitely wasn't at the level of a deep dive simulation. Chapter 833. This must be the big shots from the inner world. I can't compete with them. I can't compete with them. Sure enough, it's more realistic for a small fry to build a shelter, bit by bit. Compared to the capriciousness of the great swamp church, Veteran had a stronger resistance to the bizarre scene in front of him. After a slight fluctuation in his heart, he regained his balance. He looked at the exquisite structure that Mr. Mo had planned purely with an attitude of appreciation and knowledge. He saw that the dark red color of the skeleton due to repeated processing had become more intense. It seemed to be glowing, as if the marrow inside the skeleton had turned into a fluid that passed through the various connection points of the exoskeleton and connected them step by step. It was obvious that the aberration trait inside had been activated. Veteran was most familiar with his own work. He could see the state of the processed skeleton at a glance. While processing, the activity of the aberration trait was retained. This was the core of this set of technology, and it was also the most valuable part. Generally speaking, this reserved aberration trait existed as a stimulant. It stimulated the user's potential for a short period of time and exploded with extraordinary power. Then, the user would have to bear the corresponding risks. That minor brother of the soul church had half died because of this. However, the aberration trait usually took effect through infiltration and infection of flesh and blood. There was not much meaning in simply activating it. Mr. Mo, on the other hand, seemed to be using it as some kind of fuel. As for the first fire that ignited it, Mr. Mo's deeply controlled and rhythmic breathing, as well as the somewhat inflated outline of his body, formed an obvious causal relationship with it. Veteran judged that Mr. Mo had activated his physical strength, giving the skeleton a driving force, causing the aberration trait inside to ignite. It circulated and changed in the specially designed structure before being output to the outer layer. The inner layer, the middle layer, followed by the outer layer. The illusory light and shadow symbols that were presented by the projection function seemed to have become a substantial existence. The energy that was transmitted from the inner and middle layers was injected into it. It flowed endlessly along the plan structure and gradually dispersed in an orderly manner, causing the three-dimensional projection structure of the outermost layer to become more and more complex. Veteran's vision was a little blurred. He unconsciously blinked, and when his pupils focused again, the scene in front of him became even more absurd. The complex projection symbols and structure at the outermost layer gradually became blurred. To be more precise, what was blurred was the boundary between them and the surrounding space. I can only use external objects and corresponding designs to magnify and improve in order to strive to achieve my goal in a limited area. Master Show, the exoskeleton you made basically meets my requirements, but there must be some minor adjustments in the design and craftsmanship. The craftsmanship can't be considered as minor adjustments, right? Veteran finally calmed down and talked about the matter as it stood, but for some reason, he felt a little diffident. The strength that Mr. Mo displayed far exceeded the upper limit of his estimation. Was this a belated show of strength? Was this a warning for the slow progress of his investment business? Veteran could not help but feel petty, but Mr. Mo was easier to talk to than he imagined. In terms of craftsmanship, I will ask another friend, and I will send you the specific suggestions later. But during this period, Master Show, you will have to prepare more raw materials. This was expected, so Veteran asked casually, how many? Based on the finished product, at least 10 or 20 sets. You are going to arm a squadron. They are expendable. Recalling the distorted appearance of the exoskeleton before it disappeared, Veteran easily believed it. He wanted to ask for more details, but he saw Mr. Mo's expression become serious. His attention shifted, and he seemed to have picked up a certain communication. He mumbled. Sis. Half a second later, he said, yes, it's convenient. No matter what he said, his eyes subconsciously glanced at the veteran. The latter was a perceptive person. He did not say much, nodded, and quickly turned to leave so that everyone would not feel awkward. But when he was about to leave, Veteran still heard Mr. Mo's amplified voice, "You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."